Yes, no? So have you all seen the result? Seen the result? Got it? Not able to see the result? So what was your expectation from the paper? How much would be your score be? You might have calculated it on your own. You might have got the solutions also. See, the website is not working. It is because of the Amazon Web Service is down right now, last 3-4 hours. But we have compiled the result already. We have the result with us. The topper has scored around 148 marks in this test. And anybody who has scored more than 10%, anybody who has scored more than 60 marks in this paper is amongst the top 10% out of the overall 5,500 to 6,000 people who have appeared in this test, including the offline and the online mode. Okay, so welcome back. So the pre-Pareekshan test has been completed. I would request all of you to turn on your camera so that we can have an interactive session here. I hope you found the paper well. You gave it your best in this paper. As soon as the ELEARN starts to work, because the Amazon Web Service is down right now, that is why you might not be able to access the ELEARN platform right now. But we have already compiled the result. It is already there. As soon as the web service is restored, you will be able to access your result. No need to be anxious about it. Okay. So starting with this, I would like to ask you a few questions. How was your experience of the pre-Pareekshan test? Some of you who have attempted this test, how was your experience of this test? Anybody? Felt a little tough comparatively. So is the prelims examination test easy? Is it? The prelims examination is also tough, isn't it? That's why the low cutoff. Right? Tougher than expected. What was tough in this examination? Environment and medieval. Okay. History was stuck. Plus, many of you might have not started your preparation as well at this point. So that is why sometimes it becomes difficult once you have not revised all these subjects. It becomes difficult for you to handle some of the portions, isn't it? Environment was tough. Okay. Okay, so anybody would like to share the experience of the pre-Pareekshan test? How was the paper? How was your attempt? What are your takeaways from this paper? Vivek Nanda has raised the hand. I would unmute you. Yes, Vivek.
Sir, very good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Sir, I have experience, sir, about paper. It was, sir, very good combination of current affair with static syllabus.
Okay.
There was some questions regarding pesticide and some economic question.
Yes.
And current affair was also very much assimilated. Yes,
how
sir.
was your attempt? Was it
My
good?
attempt, sir, my proper attempt was near about 76, sir. But
Oh, that's
after that, in second attempt, I did 7 to 8 question more.
Okay.
It means
That's
80
good.
to 83.
That's good. That's good. That's good.
Yes, sir. And sir,
Yes, come again.
sir, I would like to tell you, sir, the test was in, I think, sir, economy. Some question was very much lengthy, as well as some question was little more depth, like FDI question. So we never know the how the FDI we can define.
See, if you go through the prelims examination papers of the previous year of last 4 years or 5 years, the UPSC questions are also of that level only, isn't it?
Yes, sir. Yes.
So that is why we have to be prepared about some tough questions that are going to be asked anyways in some of the sections.
Sir, if possible, please, sir, if possible, please tell how we can approach environment. Environment.
So that is the whole idea of this class. It is not just about the solution to the questions that were asked in the paper. Anyways,
Yes,
you already got the solution. What we are going to do in this discussion is we are going to focus on an elaborate strategy. What exactly should be your strategy for the prelims examination from now on, because only 4 months are left for the prelims examination. That was the whole idea, so that once you appear in this test, you also realize the importance of starting right away for the prelims examination of 2023, because now 4 months are left. And if you have a good enough strategy to follow from now on, that will be very, very beneficial for everybody who is appearing for the prelims examination. Now, in the coming 4 months, you will have more pre-Pareekshan tests, which will be all India open mock tests, which will be helpful for you to understand your level. So first, you have taken this test. You just look at your performance in this test. Then prepare well for the next pre-Pareekshan test. Most of the subjects from the prelims examination perspective, you try to prepare them well. And then test yourself again in the coming pre-Pareekshan tests, Pre-Pareekshan 2 and Pre-Pareekshan 3 at an all India level, right? So now, if we have to talk about the paper that was asked this time, it was not just about the paper that we have just taken in the pre-Pareekshan test. The overall idea is that if we understand the nature of the prelims examination properly, if we understand the way in which you have to attempt the paper, if you have a good enough strategy for preparation as well as test taking, only then you might be able to score good marks in the prelims examination. Because normally what happens is that we tend to panic and try to cover almost everything that we see without a proper strategy. Your scores tend to not cross the cutoff examination that is there in the prelims examination, right? So that is one problem that majority of the people have. Which areas to focus more upon, which areas should be taken lightly. Some of you might not find history very well. Some of you might not, geography might not be a favorite subject for some people. Polity might be easy for some people. So that is how it is not your favorite subject, but it is how you have a proper elaborate plan. That will matter more if you go with that strategy in the prelims examination. That is very, very important. Now, if you look at this paper, the idea of preparing this kind of test with a level of difficulty of the prelims examination, plus also the sections were divided on a similar line. So if you have taken this test, I think these should be your takeaways as far as the test is concerned. First is, if you are taking any prelims examination test in a test series, if you are taking any test, and if you are actually attempting the real prelims examination, first thing is you need to attempt sufficient number of questions. If you just go on reading the questions and you're not able to have sufficient attempt in the examination, it would not be easy for you to crack the prelims examination. For example, there are 100 questions. The cutoff is somewhere around 98, 95 these days. In the last 4 or 5 years, it has been that way. So if you do not have a sufficient score, sufficient attempt in the paper, you might not be able to score or clear the cutoff. Let's say in a paper where we have 100 questions, if somebody attempts only, let's say 45, that would be not considered as a good attempt in the examination. So first thing that you need to focus upon while taking any test is that you need to have a sufficient number of attempt in the examination. Now, how exactly do you decide that what is the sufficient number which would be helpful for you to clear the prelims examination? That all depends upon your level of accuracy and how well you have prepared for the examination. So next takeaway can be the overall coverage. Coverage is very important. If you look at this paper, it had combination of static portions. It had current affairs, questions directly being asked from the current affairs, and not just current affairs. Even in the static portion, some of the questions were inspired from the current affairs or had either one statement or two statements which were from the current affairs. So whenever you are preparing for the prelims examination, the focus has to be on coverage, elaborate, plus balance between your static and current affairs. Now, the problem normally which happens with all of us is that we tend to over focus on only either one section of the examination. For example, some people are so much into current affairs preparation that they tend to forget that the static portion is also important for the examination. There might be other set of people who might just be focusing on the static portion only and might not be covering current affairs sufficiently. But if you look at the paper of the previous years, plus if you look at this test, which was also a simulation of the prelims examination, you needed to have a balance between your basic understanding of the static portion as well as a good enough understanding of the current affairs. Idea is to balance your overall preparation in all these subjects. Even within all these subjects, let's say let's take the example of polity, which is considered to be one of the static portion. Here, you also need to analyze the different aspects on which UPSC has been asking questions in the past years. That is how you will be able to create an elaborate strategy for cracking the prelims examination. So first is you need to focus upon your core parts or the static portion of your syllabus. Along with that, your current affairs. In the static portion, if you are good with static portion, you will be able to complement your current affairs with the static portion. Without understanding of the static portion, current affairs has no meaning, right? Now, what happens is if you try to cover the current affairs elaborately, that is, you try to cover them from different sources, you might not have the depth of understanding that is required because your focus might be just on the collection of information. That won't work in the examination. The focus of UPSC examination and the questions that are being formed these days require in-depth understanding of the topics. That is why every now and then we hear that limited sources, multiple revisions. If you look at the static portions, we have standard books that we need to study. There are standard sources. Let's say for polity, all of us refer to the standard book of Lakshmikant. For history, we have Bipan Chandra, Spectrum, right? For geography, we have the NCRTs. So for the static portion, the most important thing is to focus upon your standard textbooks, plus complement these standard sources with the current affairs from at least one source. That's it, not more than that, because otherwise you'll tend to get confused by just preparing and over focusing on the current affairs, which will be at the cost of your static subjects. Let's say polity, history, geography, basics of economy, basics of environment, isn't it? Plus, if you look at the distribution of the paper in the UPSC examination, UPSC has very well balanced the static portion with the current affairs. If you look at the static portion and its weightage in the examination, around 40 to 50 questions will be from the static portion, from history part, from polity part, from your geography part, plus static portions from economy as well as current affairs and economy. So in this, we also need to understand that which all subjects are there in which the current affairs have much more importance here. For example, all of you might have attempted the test, and in the economic questions, majority of the questions were from current affairs. You go to the section of science and technology, some of the questions or majority of the questions, besides the static questions from your NCRTs, they might be inspired from the current affairs. However, when you go to polity, although some of the questions were inspired from the current affairs, but it required only your basic understanding of the subject, which you would anyways do from the Lakshmikant or the basic book. Let's take the example of history. What is current affairs in history? No current affairs. History, the questions can be inspired from the current events, but mostly the questions will be from your static portion only. That is the whole idea I want to convey. And while this discussion, we'll be looking at what are the ways you can prepare these subjects well, the basic subjects. What are the sources you need to refer to, right? That is a very important thing for an elaborate strategy if somebody is serious about this year's prelims examination. That is the whole point of this discussion, not just the solutions to the questions that were asked in this test. Okay? This is one very important thing that you should note. Third important thing here is your accuracy in the test. First is sufficient number of attempts. That is, your attempts have to be at such a level that after deducting your negative marks, the cutoff is clear. For example, you have attempted, let's say, 70 questions in the paper. Out of these 70 questions, you are marking 15 questions incorrectly, right? Because 1/3 is the negative marking. This score would somewhere be around 100 marks. But if you attempt only, let's say, 50 questions, and even out of these 50 questions, you attempt 15 questions incorrectly, then your score would decrease considerably. Fine. So first is sufficient attempt. Second is balance between the preparation or during the preparation time, balance between your core subjects, static portions, as well as current affairs. Third important aspect that I want to highlight here is the accuracy. If you have good enough accuracy, good enough preparation of some of these portions in the prelims examination, your accuracy is going to improve. Normally, all of us are concerned about the negative marking. That is why sometimes we tend to attempt very less. Sometimes we tend to attempt over more number of questions than what is required for the examination. For example, some of you might have the tendency of attempting 100 questions, let's say sometimes. But in these 100 questions, if you attempt 40 questions incorrectly, let's say, and 60 questions correctly, your score would decrease drastically. It will be somewhere below 90 marks. So accuracy is very, very important. In this, the accuracy means negative marks should be reduced considerably, and that will happen only when you have a clear-cut focus to focus upon for the preparation. Let's say you are focusing on current affairs and core subjects. In these areas, if you do not have command, if you do not have understanding, you are just mugging up the facts, you are just trying to gather information, that won't work in this exam. You will require the understanding. Whatever you are studying, you need to have a focus that you are focusing on the understanding of the things that are being discussed in the current affairs. It is not just a collection of the information. And that is only what is going to improve your accuracy. You might have looked at the questions from the current affairs. They required understanding. They were not just in the nature of information that you see in the current affairs. If you did not have understanding of these current affairs, you would not have been able to solve the questions in the examination. Agree or not? Yes? So second thing I want to highlight is to improve your accuracy, you need to focus and you should have a good enough understanding of all the portions of the syllabus. And that would happen only when you have limited resources and you have revised them multiple times. That is what is going to improve your accuracy. So this is one important takeaway that we should have here. Now coming back to the performance of people in this test, I would like to draw your attention to a very important I would draw your attention to the performance of the aspirants. You can see it on your screen, how well you have scored in this test. On the screen, the first are the marks of the topper. These are people who have high level of accuracy, because despite a very high attempt of 98 questions in the examination, 80 questions were correct. That is why the topper was able to get around 148 marks, right? Plus this number that you see here, the percentile, 62. This basically is highlighting that if you have scored more than 60 marks in this paper, you are amongst the top 10% in the pre-Pareekshan test. If you look at the prelims examination also, there are around 5 lakh people who are appearing. In that, only 10,000 to 12,000 people are going to clear the examination. So idea is to remain in the top 4-5% so that you are able to be very close to the cutoff and you are able to clear the cutoff also. This is how the performance looks like. If I would scroll down, this is how the score table looks like. I'm not going to reveal the names here. It will be uploaded on the ELEARN. Right now, you might not be able to access the results because there is some issue. The Amazon web server is down right now. Once it is restored, you will be able to access it through the ELEARN platform, right? I just wanted to highlight that your result has been compiled. Don't be anxious. You'll be able to access it. Fine. This is how the result looks like. So if you have scored more than 60, 65, a very good score would be if somebody has scored more than 75, that would be considered as a decent score in this preparation, in this paper. Plus, the idea is because you are just starting with your preparation, and even then you have scored more than 75. That is a pretty good score. Here, the problem is all of us want to be the topper in this paper. Yes, all of us want to be the topper. But some of us might be lying somewhere around 80 marks, 90 marks, 60 marks, 65 marks. The idea is to improve upon from this performance that we have done in this pre-Pareekshan test. So coming back to our discussion, the takeaways that we have just seen. If you try to understand your attempt, and if you are scoring somewhere between this range, scoring 50 or less, scoring 51 to 75, scoring 76 to 100, or scoring 100 plus. If you are scoring 100 plus, there is no problem. You are doing well if you have not taken the help of internet while solving this paper. If you are able to score 100 marks without the help of internet, you are doing pretty well as far as the prelims examination preparation is concerned. And there are people who have good command over the prelims examination, nature of the prelims examination, and they have an elaborate strategy for the prelims examination. That is how they are able to score more. It is not just about reading or studying or gathering knowledge. Of course, it is important, but that has to be associated with a very good strategy to score such high range of marks in the examination. Here, if you look at the people who have scored less than 50 marks, some of you might have scored less than 50 marks. There might be instances of maybe lack of preparation till now. Some of you might not have started the preparation. Others, even after an elaborate preparation for last 6 months for the prelims examination, they might still be struggling. The problem that some of you might be facing is low attempt and low accuracy. That is one of the scenarios which highlights that we have scored less marks because there is issue of low attempt and low accuracy. For example, some of you might have attempted only 40 questions. Out of that, even out of those 40 questions, there are 10 questions that are incorrect. Your score is inevitably going to be very less. This is one case or one scenario. Preparation is fine. Preparation is a different aspect. But if you look at your attempt, your strategy of attempting the paper, that looks a bit problematic here. Because first is your attempts are low. And secondly, even in this low attempt, you have low accuracy. That is what can get you below 50 marks. A person who is attempting decently and with a decent level of accuracy will, of course, be able to score around 70 marks or 65 marks. That is above your 50 marks. The second scenario here is somebody with high attempts and low accuracy. Normal scenario would be somebody has done decent attempts with a decent amount of accuracy, but the attempt is not sufficient to cross your cutoff. But if you are attempting too much and have low accuracy, let's say you attempt 90 questions and 40 questions are incorrect. That is what I want to highlight as high attempt and low accuracy. Plus, the nature of the prelims examination is changing tremendously in the past 4 or 5 years. The focus of UPSC has been on making questions that only when you are confident you should attempt the questions. The guesswork and the strategies or the tips and tricks that have been developed over a period of time, all of them have been tested by the UPSC. These do not work in normal circumstances. So only a very good understanding is what is your best friend for the prelims examination. Fine. Third scenario might be high attempt and moderate accuracy. That is when you will be having score between 76 to 100. And the people who are scoring more than your 100 marks are the people who have high attempt as well as high accuracy. Idea is if you are lying somewhere in this range where you are attempting high but your accuracy is lacking, you can improve that by regular test taking. You can improve that by improving your understanding. You can improve that by having an elaborate strategy, and that you can create only when you have taken enough number of tests. You understand the nature of the questions. You understand the way in which you have to balance your preparation across the subjects plus between the static portion and the current affairs. These people have good enough chances to get into this range of scoring more than 100 marks and also clearing the prelims examination. People who are lying below 75 or between 50 to 75, they will have to work more upon their content. At the same time, you also need to focus upon your test taking strategy. So the most important thing from now on, because now just 4 months are left. We have February, we have March, we have April and May. Prelims examination is scheduled on 28th of May this year. So what should be your strategy in these remaining 4 months? That is very important for everybody, and that everybody is concerned about right now. So what would be a good strategy to follow from now on? What would be the good strategy to follow from now on? A good strategy would be you start revising all of your subjects properly. Complement that with elaborate test taking. Study, take test. Revise, take test. Complete a portion, take the sectional test. Once you have completed the full syllabus, take the full length tests. That is the whole idea, because that is how you'll be able to understand your mistakes. Once you have taken a test, how do you analyze the paper is also very important. Normally what happens is we just look at the score, get disheartened, and put that paper aside. That is not what works in the prelims examination. You should use test series as a tool to improve your scores from here upon. Let's say you are taking a test of history sectional tests. Once you have taken that test, and you might be scoring, let's say the test was of 100 marks. It had 50 questions. And out of these 50 questions and out of the 100 marks, you're able to score, let's say 35 marks or 40 marks. In that scenario, if you try to analyze the paper, your idea is, once you've taken the test, go back to your basic books and look at the questions which you marked incorrectly, even from the sources which you referred to, and the questions were from those sources. Let's say in the history section, in the 100 questions, in the 50 questions that are asked in a sectional test in history, out of these 50 questions, if the 35 questions in this test were from Spectrum, were from Bipan Chandra, even in these 35 questions, which are from standard sources that you are referring to, that everybody is referring to, and once you attempt this test and you find that even out of these 35 questions, you have scored 10 marks incorrectly. You have attempted these 10 questions incorrectly. Idea is to check that, why was I not able to recall? Maybe there is a need for revision. Maybe you did not understand the question properly. Maybe you just attempted the question on gut feeling, or you did not read the question properly. That is, did it require us to answer the correct statements or to identify the incorrect statements? That is what happens in the examination. Sometimes when the question is of negative nature, when it requires us to analyze the incorrect statements, we are able to find the incorrect statements. But when we are taking the question answer, we tend to mark the correct answer, correct statement there. That is what fetches us negative marks, isn't it? So the analysis of the paper is really, really important. Once you have taken a test in a test series, idea is go back to the books from which you have studied. Of course, look at the explanations, but that is not the only way you analyze the paper. You analyze the paper by going back to your books, going back to the Spectrum and Bipan Chandra in history, Lakshmikant in polity, NCRT in geography, if the questions were from there. Beyond that, anything that is beyond your sources, standard sources that you're referring, that is in the form of knowledge gathering that you can do from some of these tests, which is what we understand, that these are more areas that you should cover. They might be important beyond the standard sources that you're following. Got it, everybody? Most important thing is how you're analyzing the test series. Don't just look at your performance in the test series, because performance is fine. You might get perturbed that, okay, I'm scoring less marks, I should stop taking more number of tests. But that is not how you improve your test, improve your score in the prelims examination. Only when you have taken a test, only when you have gone through the analysis of it, you have analyzed it properly, looked at these books again. For example, you're taking a test in polity, let's say, and a question was asked in the polity from the fundamental rights, about the basic understanding of the fundamental rights. In that section, if you were not able to attempt that question correctly in the test series, go back to the book, study that this question was asked from which section, and then revise it properly. That way you will have photographic memory of some of the sections that you have studied. Otherwise, if you just look at the explanation, the language will be different. It might not be the same as what you have studied in the Lakshmikant. And then there will be inconsistency in your thought process. So it is better that the questions which are asked from the standard sources in the test series and you have attempted the test, always go back to the standard sources which you have referred to. That is the best way of doing this analysis of the paper, rather than just looking at the solutions. Look at the solutions for those questions which were beyond the sources that you're covering, and gather it as a form of, in the form of knowledge. Fine. This is how you improve your test taking skills with every test after this point of time, from February to May. So if you look at this time, now, because we have 4 months left, of course, this is going to be a continuous process of revising static portions, revising current affairs, as well as taking the tests. But if you want to plan it even further, if you want to plan it properly, you can divide this period into 3 parts. 3 part is till mid-March, you can try to complete your first revision, at least of the most important subjects, and a few current affairs. Not everything that is there in the current affairs, and not just over focusing on the current affairs. You try to complete your static subjects: history, ancient, medieval, modern, art and culture, polity, Lakshmikant, your geography from NCRTs, do the map work, analyze the previous year questions properly. That is also important. That is what helps us in understanding the nature of the questions that UPSC is going to ask. Do this thing. In the coming 1.5 months, try to cover as many subjects as possible and try to attempt as many sectional tests as possible. After mid-March, around 20th of March, what you can do is, once you have covered your first leg of preparation, once you have revised your basic subjects, complement that with the prelims revision classes in the second leg of the preparation. First, you have done your preparation on your own till your March period. You have taken some sectional tests that are left in the test series. After that, the second revision has to be from mid-March onwards till April end, when we have the prelims revision classes, or the QIP prelims classes as we call them sometimes. Till the mid-April or around 20th, 25th April, the prelims QIP classes, prelims revision classes will be over. In these classes, you will be revising the subjects once again, static portions as well as the current affairs. And this will be a very good time to update on the current affairs. Plus, whatever is being discussed in the QIP will be there in the form of content in your Compass magazines. I think somebody who is serious about current affairs should not go beyond these sources, because you do not have much time. You have to also improve upon your static subjects, focus on the static subjects in this period, improve upon your static subject and your understanding by the QIP classes, plus also complement your preparation of current affairs through the QIP classes. QIP classes will have a revision of static as well as current affairs in the question answer format only. That will further improve your test taking strategy. Once these QIP classes or the prelims revision classes are over, in the remaining 1 month, revise elaborately, because that will be in the form of third and the fourth revision for you. That is how a good strategy would look like. First part of the strategy is focusing and balancing between both the sections of the syllabus, static as well as current affairs. Secondly, analyze the sections properly. Look at the previous year question papers. Analyze the areas of focus for UPSC. That is how you're going to understand the nature of different subjects and the way in which you need to prepare. That will be done elaborately in the QIP classes also. So best is you try to divide this time properly, have a target of covering almost 80% of the syllabus till mid-March, then complement it with the QIP classes, revise elaborately with the QIP classes. You'll be able to solve so many questions in the class, the current affairs, and what aspects to focus upon in the current affairs. That too in the QIP prelims revision classes, followed by a revision on your own, revision one or revising once or twice before the prelims examination. That is how you'll be able to cover the syllabus in a complete manner 3-4 times. So limited resources, multiple revisions, even in that in-depth understanding, by having a good amount of focus, if you try to multiply your sources, you'll be stuck in these remaining 4 months. Idea is not to increase the sources, but to understand the sources that you already have. And you might have felt in this paper that you took in the pre-pareekshan test, some of the questions were from the standard textbooks only. Some of the questions, even in the ancient medieval part, were from NCRTs, were from Bipan Chandra in the modern history. right? They were from old NCRTs. They were from new NCRTs. In geography, some of them were from basic mapping work. If you looked at the maps properly, if you've done your mapping practice, you could have solved some of these questions. Okay. Plus, if you look at the nature of the prelims examination, if you look at the way in which UPSC has been asking the questions, this is the distribution of the questions of different sections in the prelims examination. These are our subjects which we have to prepare from the prelims examination. This is how your questions are being asked from the sections differently. First is your polity and governance, in which almost 12% questions were asked this time. That is around 12 questions, because we have 100 questions. This is how the questions were asked this year. In the economy section, there were around 18 questions. In the geography, there were around 9 questions. Environment section, there were around 18 questions again, followed by 14 questions in science and technology, followed by 13 questions from international organizations, and 16 questions from history section. Now here, if you look at the static portions in the UPSC syllabus, polity and governance, many of the questions are only from the static portion only. In the geography sections, mostly the questions are from physical geography, basic understanding of the geography through NCRTs, plus mapping work on different areas of mapping on which UPSC has asked questions. Fine. Thirdly, if you look at environment section, this is supposed to be the toughest section in the paper, environment and science and technology. And the weightage of both of these sections is somewhere around 18 questions and 14 questions, which means somewhere around 32 questions in the paper are asked from this section. Now, idea is you maximize your score in the portions which are from the static portion of your syllabus, where you have standard sources to refer to. For example, for polity, we have a standard source in the form of Lakshmikant. For geography, we have NCRTs, and you complement it with mapping, your scores would increase. Economy, you focus on basic understanding of the logical concepts and, of course, your current affairs, about which Baswa sir will talk about in the second half of the discussion. Fine. Then if you look at science and technology, in this also, now in the economy, you have to complete your logical parts, understanding of the concepts, complemented with the current affairs. Leave aside environment and science and technology for a minute. Then next important section is your history. This time there were around 16 questions. Normally the distribution keeps on varying, plus minus 4 or 5 questions in all the sections. Sometimes the UPSC might ask 20 questions in history section. It might increase the number of questions in polity from 12 to 17, 18. That is going to happen. In history also, we have standard sources in the form of old and new NCRTs, plus Spectrum and Bipan Chandra. And many a times the question in the modern history section will be from your standard sources only, except for a few 1 or 2 questions which are difficult, which are beyond these standard sources. Idea is, if you collectively count the number of questions which are asked from the static portions, polity plus economy, which is fairly predictable in the examination if you have done your preparation properly, geography as well as history, you might be able to attempt, let's say, 50 to 55 questions properly. In these subjects, why I am focusing on these subjects is because they have standard sources to refer to. Beyond that, in the environment section, in the science and technology section, sometimes these are the most difficult questions. Even if you to look at the conceptual questions that are asked in the environment section, they are difficult at times. And if you look at the current affairs that are asked, they are also difficult in the science and technology and the environment section. In this, what we got to do is we have to understand the nature of questions that are asked in both these sections, your environment and science and technology. Once you understand the nature of the questions, you'll be able to understand that there are few questions which are going to be on easier side, which you might be able to solve from a bare minimum preparation of the static portion of the environment section, conceptual understanding, basic science through NCRTs, and some of the current affairs that you see in the Compass magazine and the QIP classes. So try to have a decent number of score in the environment and science and technology. Try to attempt the most easiest questions in this section focus more on the sections which are fairly predictable, which have fairly decent standard sources. That is the whole idea. If you look at the questions that were asked from international organizations, UPSC skipped this portion for past 2 years. This year, they have come up with almost 13 questions in this section. So even in this, you can divide and look at the previous questions, the areas from which UPSC has asked the questions. If you analyze the current affairs in all these sections, you'll be able to understand that there are few areas which UPSC inevitably is focusing upon. That is how you're going to improve your scores, even in these some unpredictable sections, right? This is how your elaborate strategy is going to look like. That is what we kept in mind while designing this pre-Pareekshan test. That was the whole idea. So we are going to discuss the questions from different sections: polity, history, environment, science and technology. Some of the questions that I have picked up, because I wanted to highlight that these are some of the areas which is a regular focus of UPSC. Keep a track of them in different subjects, in your polity, in history, in geography. Okay. Plus, we are going to look at some of the important topics which are repeatedly asked by UPSC. Fine. So, in the polity section, if you look at the polity section properly, the type of questions that are asked by UPSC, one type of question that UPSC is continuously focusing upon is understanding of the basic concepts in the polity part, which is sometimes you can prepare it from the political theory NCERT, a basic understanding of that. UPSC has asked questions regarding understanding of the concept of equality, understanding of the concept of liberty, understanding of the concept of secularism, definition of state, nationalism, rights versus duties. This basic understanding is required in the polity section. That is one type of question that is asked by UPSC. That is why this question that you see in this particular portion in the paper was related to essential features of nationalism. Plus, another thing that we needed to focus upon while solving this question is that it requires us to identify which of the following is not an essential feature. Problem is, if you are not reading the questions carefully in the examination, your tendency would be of marking the first option itself, because it talks about belief in a common territory. This is one of the features of nationalism. Second is a community based on shared ideas. A nation is at best an imagined community in an imagined territory, right? Sometimes some countries which have control of this territory, they have created a community. That is when they have a clear-cut nation that is developed. Plus, sometimes there are countries which are aspiring to become a nation. Fine. So that is how, if you look at this third portion, a community having shared values based on the constitution, it does not clearly define that it is an essential feature of nationalism. Constitution is an outcome of the formation of nations sometimes. Not all the nations that are there have constitutions. Some of them might be monarchies there in the present times. They might not have constitution, isn't it? Plus, some of the countries which are some of the people who are aspiring to become a nation, they have not created their constitution till now. Even in our Indian nationalist movement, till we became independent, we did not have a constitution. It was framed only once we became a nation, which clearly highlights that even before the formal formation of the India as a nation after 1947, the concept was there. It was an imagined community, right? Based on certain values and principles. That is why constitution is not necessary for the concept of nationalism, right? For example, we are seeing the nationalistic movements in some of the Middle Eastern countries, like there is Kurdistan movement, right? Palestinians are aspiring for a state, right? So their nationalism is as alive as the nationalism that is alive in different regions. So politically, how you understand nationalism is this understanding. Constitution might be an outcome of this national aspiration that the people have. Okay? This is the kind of understanding that is required for solving questions which will be asked about the basic concepts related to polity. You can prepare it well from the NCERT of political theory of class 11th of political science. Fine. That is bare minimum that you can do to improve upon your understanding of some of these concepts. Secondly, the next question that we had, the next type of question that we are having in the polity section in the prelims examination are basically related to some of the important features of our constitution: preamble, fundamental rights, directive principles, fundamental duties, and understanding of the concepts of these sections in the polity and the constitution. isn't it? That is one area of focus for the UPSC. Fundamental rights, every year you might find a question related to fundamental rights. Understanding the different fundamental rights, understanding the characteristics and the features of these fundamental rights. Who is the responsible authority for enforcing these fundamental rights? Different interpretations, different judgments that have been there. You are all preparing them. Have a clear-cut focus. UPSC is inevitably going to ask questions related to understanding of the fundamental rights, etc. That is why we had a question related to fundamental rights in this section. In this, the first statement is they are always individual and independent of the society. Are they always individual? Of course not. Article 29 and 30 related to the cultural rights, they are communitarian. Not right to freedom of religion. Sometimes it is at an individual level, but it is also at a community level. So they are not individual. Then secondly, they are independent of the society. Not always. If you look at the Article 19, freedom of speech, it has reasonable restrictions because it also impacts your society at large. You cannot exercise your freedom of speech absolutely because it might hamper your functioning of the society. That is why we have reasonable restrictions sometimes. Take the best example of right against untouchability. In this, the society will have to be molded in such a manner that untouchability is not practiced. Fine. So definitely in this section, they are always individual and independent of the society. It does not stand true here. Second is they are always directed against the authority of the state. Sometimes they are also directed against individuals who are practicing untouchability. That is why they are not going to be directly or always directed against the state. Third is their application to the armed forces decided by the government, which is also incorrect, because if you look at the provisions, it is the parliament who decides by law how these fundamental rights are going to be implemented for the armed forces. So now the correct answer would be none of the above are correct. The idea was to highlight the nature of the questions that can be framed. A good enough understanding is required while solving some of these questions, even in the polity section. Plus, they can be prepared well if you have gone through your basic sources, Lakshmikant, and political theory. Coming to the next question. Appointments of the judges has continuously been in the news, although it is a question from the static portion, right? Normally, if you are preparing polity, you will of course prepare judiciary, how the judges are appointed, how they are removed, what are the powers of the Supreme Court, original jurisdiction, overlapping jurisdiction, advisory jurisdiction, all these jurisdictions you are already studying. But what is there as far as the current affairs are concerned in this question? If you look at the first part of this question, Collegium for Judicial Appointments consists of Chief Justice of India and the 4 senior most judges of the Supreme Court. Fine. Second is, if the successor CGI is not amongst the 5 senior most judges of the Supreme Court, he is made a part of the collegium. What is happening right now is the current CGI is going to have a long term this time for almost 2 years. During this period, some of the senior most judges would retire then. They would not become the CGI. So when this CGI is going to retire, who is going to be the next CGI? He might not be amongst the 4 senior most judges. That is why he or she has to be included amongst this. That is why the 5th senior most judge is also being involved in the collegium. That is how you understand. That is what is the requirement of the current affairs in this particular question. Because this is going an ongoing issue, the appointments, there is a lot of debate regarding the process of appointment of the judges collegium. There are statements by the government. There are statements by the Chief Justice of India. That is why this is one portion which we can expect in the examination also. That is why appointments of the judges, different aspects of it, plus what is there in the current affairs. If you do it well, if you prepare it well, you could solve it easily in the examination if a question comes up from this section. That is how UPSC has also asked questions in the past years also, right? Then the idea of right to shelter. UPSC has been asking questions related to some of the fundamental rights like right to privacy, right? Right to marry. There was a question related to that. And we need to understand it is related to which all things. First is your Article 19 under fundamental rights. Second is Universal Declaration of Human Rights. These two are pretty simple. The third one, theory of eminent domain. It is basically the power of state to acquire private property for public purposes, which is nowhere related to or you can say the state has the power to acquire the private, even the private property during the when it is required for a public purpose. That is why the theory of eminent domain is not related to or cannot be found with the right to shelter. Right? So the correct answer here would be A, 1 and 2 only. The theory of eminent domain is a bit different from when we try to understand the right to shelter. Then next, consider the following statements about minorities. Now, this is a question related to minorities as far as the National Commission for Minorities is concerned. According to this, who all are to be considered as minorities? So as far as the National Commission for Minorities is concerned, the first statement is both religious and linguistic minorities. No, only religious minorities are the ones which are included here. Secondly, minorities are notified under the National Commission for Minorities Act 1992 at the state level. This was a keyword here. No, it is identified at a national level. This includes some of the minority religions like Jains, Sikh, Buddhist, right? All these religions have been recognized as minorities according to this, and Jains have been identified as minority. So answer would be A, 3 only. Fine. This was about polity. In the polity section, you might have found many more questions related to such kind of topics that are regularly asked by UPSC. Isn't it? If you try to analyze the previous year questions properly, you will find the areas of focus of UPSC. Plus, in polity, you can't say that this section is important and this section is not important. All the sections in the Lakshmikant, prepare them elaborately. That is the whole idea. By taking the help of few questions, I have highlighted the most important areas that we need to focus upon. A basic understanding of the logical concepts sometimes is required to have an elaborate understanding of the polity section. Next is, we are going to look at the questions that can be asked from the ancient and the medieval section, which most of you might have found difficult in this paper. And there are also difficult sections in your prelims examination. So normally when you try to prepare these sections, you might be having a tendency of just going through the books, reading them multiple times. How to improve your understanding of these sections, especially from the prelims examination perspective? What are the areas to focus upon in these sections? So if you have analyzed the previous questions, these are few areas from which UPSC is continuously asking the questions. Ancient cities and ports, scholars and exponents of Indian philosophies, ancient travelers, literature, Buddhism and Jainism, religion, terms used in ancient and medieval kingdoms, especially in their economy, especially in the administration of these ancient and medieval kingdoms, on which you might have found various questions. Architecture under these questions, under these kingdoms, Bhakti and Sufi movements, as well as different facets of art and culture, painting, craft, music, dance forms, etc. Now, once you have studied the subjects, ancient, medieval, you've gone through the art and culture. Look out for these things whenever you are studying any chapter in the ancient medieval part. Whatever you find from these perspectives might be important for us from the examination. Plus, if you go through the History Compass magazine, it has been curated inspired from these questions from the previous years only. Some of the focus areas in the Compass magazine of history are basically on these portions only. So supplement your basic books with your prelims compass. That is going to be fruitful for solving some of the questions. That is how you can have command over the ancient and medieval portion, which majority of us find difficult, isn't it? They are the ones which we find difficult. So if, let's say, if the questions from the ancient medieval, they are somewhere around 10 questions if they are asked in the examination. These 10 questions would, of course, be difficult for almost everybody. In this, out of the 10 questions, there will be around, let's say, 3 questions which nobody might have heard of. That is what happens in the prelims examination, also in the UPSC. Isn't it? There are few questions which are beyond the sources that you have covered from. In the remaining 6-7 questions, they are from your standard textbooks only, NCRTs only, old ones, new ones, your art and culture NCRT. Idea is to maximize our score in the remaining 7 questions. If out of these 7 questions, you are able to decently attempt, let's say 4 questions confidently, that is an added advantage rather than not preparing ancient and medieval properly and leaving or skipping all these 10 questions in the examination. If you will look at some of the questions that we have asked in the pre-pareekshan, if you look at the questions that have been asked in the previous years, you will find that few questions could have been solved in the ancient medieval part also, even though it is considered to be one of the most difficult section. So as far as history is concerned, ancient medieval art and culture, I've talked about an elaborate strategy how you can prepare these sections. Basic books, complement that with prelims compass, focusing on some of these areas, and of course, take tests to improve your understanding of the topics that are important for us. Fine. Let's look at a few questions that were asked, which are from the standard sources only, which are there in your prelims compass, which are there in your standard textbooks. If you look at the ancient history, questions have been asked regularly from the Indus Valley civilization. Why not elaborately prepare the Indus Valley civilization? That has to be one of the clear focus areas while you're preparing ancient and medieval history. Ancient history. Indus Valley civilization, inevitably, almost every alternate year, a question has been asked related to Indus Valley civilization. Focus on that. You should have been aware of this kind of question if it is asked. First is, food processing equipment has been discovered from the Indus Valley civilization. Now, Indus Valley civilization was famous for the technology that they had developed at a distant past. That is why it was important. So all the aspects of the technology, food processing, their architecture, their city planning, the artifacts that have been found, we should have an understanding of sites from which they have been found, which were the important sites, what were the characteristics of them. Fine. That is why bronze toy cart, which was not found in Banwali and it was found in Chunhodaro. Fine. That is why this particular statement is wrong here. Third is, terracotta models of plow have been found at Cholistan, which lies presently in Pakistan. It's a correct statement. So the answer would be A1 and 3. With an in-depth understanding of Indus Valley civilization, you'll be able to solve this question in the examination. If you just study it lightly, just go by skimming, just going through very lightly, you'll not be able to solve such questions in the examination. Next is this question. UPSC has been asking questions related to the contemporaries, which is a very important aspect for us from the examination perspective. If you look at this question, first statement reads, Ajatashatru was a contemporary of Buddha. He was the one who ruled Magad Empire, which was almost at the same time of Buddha only. Fine. Second is, Kalidasa was a contemporary of Kanishka. It is wrong. He was the contemporary of Chandragupta too. Fahian visited during the reigns of Guptas. Yes. Yun Sang visited the kingdom of Bhaskar Barman. Yun Sang had visited India during the Harsha's reign, around 6th century. And during this visit, he had also visited the Bhaskar Barman, who was a king, which was a kingdom in the Assam plains. So he had visited that also. So if you look at this particular question, Kalidasa was not a contemporary of Kanishka. And the answer here would be B, that is 1, 3, and 4. These statements are correct here. Then this is a question from art and culture. This is a question that you can solve from the understanding of Introduction to Indian Art NCERT. You might have found it difficult, but it is not a difficult question. It is from your NCERTs only. Plus, some of these things have also been asked in the previous year questions. Descent of Ganga, or sometimes that is called as Arjuna's penance, is located in Mahabalipuram. It is a correct statement. Trimurti Sadashiv, it is located not in Alora, but it is located in Elephanta Caves. Third is monumental rock-cut elephant along with the Ashokan edict. It is a statement which has been asked by UPSC in the previous years. It is not located in Sopora, it is located in Dholi. And your Dumar Lena caves, they are located in Ellora, not in Ajanta. Ellora, Ajanta, and Elephanta caves, some of the cave rock cut architecture is important from the prelims examination perspective in the art and culture section. Plus, a basic understanding of the NCERT would have helped you in understanding and solving this kind of questions. You might have found it difficult, but it's not a difficult question. It's pretty solvable. Idea is I wanted to highlight that if with a basic understanding, you could have solved some of the questions in these sections also. Not very difficult sections from the exam perspective. That is how UPSC also asks you some logical questions. There might be some questions which are difficult, but they are difficult for everybody. They should have been the ones which you skip in the examination. Even in this paper, if you found that some of the questions were difficult, you should have skipped them. Coming to the next one. Questions have been asked regularly from the medieval India related to some of the important terms. Now, these terms have been related to either their administration, either related to their economic system, or their legal machinery. We should be aware of them. And if you read about the Mughal Empire, which has been one of the important empires in the medieval history, its administrative system has been a part of the medieval India when we study. So if you look at this particular question, these are the terms which have been taken from the NCERTs only. It has been asked from the new NCERT. Which means if you could not solve this question, you have not gone through the NCERTs also properly. So try to cover them now in the remaining period. Here, all the pairs have been correctly matched. Amil Guzar was basically a revenue collector. Chachar land was a land that has been lain fallow for almost 3 or 4 years. And office of Diwan was the one which used to supervise the financial system. Moving forward, modern history. In the ancient medieval, we've seen some questions being asked from your NCERT. Some questions being asked based on the previous year questions analysis. Fine. In the modern history part, if you come to modern history, we have standard sources in the form of Spectrum, Bipan Chandra. These are the standard sources, right? All of us study from these standard sources only. In these sections, if you look at the previous year questions, these are few areas to focus upon. Some of the important movements during the Indian nationalist movement, like the non-cooperation movement, civil disobedience movement, Swadeshi movement, Quit India movement, etc. And you require to understand the nature of these movements in good amount of detail. Without a detailed understanding of these movements, you might not be able to solve some of these questions. They have been elaborately discussed in your Bipan Chandra, in your Spectrum, in your NCERT of Bipan Chandra, old NCERT. Some of them have been discussed. Look at the important Charter Acts, British governance before 1857, how the East India Company had ruled India. And then constitutional administrative machineries as well as important personalities are also important for us from the prelims examination perspective. That is how UPSC has been asking the questions, right? So if you look at some of the questions that were asked this time, in the modern history, the idea is if there are around 10 questions that are asked in the modern history, definitely there will be 7 to 8 questions from the standard sources. You will be able to solve some of them because the questions in this section are inevitably from the standard sources. 7 to 8 questions could be solved here. Idea is if we prepare these predictable sections properly, we can score good marks in the examination. We are not here to top the examination. Anyways, clearing the cutoff is important for the prelims examination. Then if you look at this question related to the Indigo Commission that was set up in 1860s. Normally when we study about the Indigo Commission, we study about a play that has been written by Deenbandhu Mitra. He was not the one who had represented the zamindars in the Indigo Commission, but he was the one who had highlighted this in detail in his play Neel Darpan related to the Indigo revolts that happened during the 1859s. And the Indigo Commission accepted and found that the indigo cultivation system was oppressive in nature, and especially because of system of advances by the European cultivators to the farmers and the zamindars in the region. That was a problem area. Okay. So first statement was incorrect. Second was correct. Secondly, if you look at the next question, it is about the CR formula. In the 1940s to 1945, 1947 period, there were so many attempts at resolution on the question of independence of India. Various missions had been sent by the British government, like Cripps mission, Cabinet mission, Wavell plan. So there were different attempts at how the transfer of power would happen by the British government to an Indian government. In this different, some of these you are studying in the history section, Cripps mission, Cabinet mission. One of the attempts was your CR formula. In that, he had tried to come up with a elaborate understanding, elaborate way in which the transfer of power could take place. Plus, this question requires you to identify which were not included in it. So if you look at the first, the question and the issue was between Muslim League and Congress at that time. So first statement which reads that the League would endorse the demand for independence and cooperate with the Congress in forming a provisional government for the transitional period, which was correct. At the end of the war, which is the end of the Second War, a plebiscite of all the inhabitants in the Muslim majority areas in the Northwest and the Northeast would decide whether or not they should form a separate state, which is also correct. Third statement is until the new constitution could be framed, the British government would remain responsible for the defense of India, which was not acceptable under the CR formula. Because it was not a part of the CR formula, it is an incorrect statement related to the CR formula, but the question requires us to identify only the incorrect statements. That is why this would be our correct answer here. So whenever you are studying a question, be aware of the demand of the question. If it is asking you to identify incorrect statement, if it is asking you to identify which of the statements are not correct related to a particular section. Then non-cooperation movement, as I've already highlighted, UPSC will ask you questions from some of these movements, standard movements that have taken place. So if you look at the first statement, the council elections were boycotted in most provinces, including Madras. It was not the case, because in Madras, the Justice Party was not in favor of the non-cooperation movement. Secondly, during the non-cooperation movement, the feudal zamindari system was also challenged by some of the castes. That is why in this period, in the Awadh region, the Nai Dhobi Bandhs were organized by the panchayats to deprive the landlords of the services of even the barbers as well as washermen, which is a correct statement. That is why the answer here would be B. Then about Sir T. Madhav Rao, a book has been written. It has been in the news in the recent times. Sometimes some of these personalities of the Indian nationalist movement, they are asked by the UPSC because they are in news sometimes and they have been given primacy in the recent times, because they are the forgotten heroes of the Indian nationalist movement, which could not find mention in some of the standard descriptions of the Indian nationalist movement. So here, if you read about Sir T. Madhav Rao, he was the one who played a very active role in the princely states, and he also served as the prime minister of 3 princely states, namely Travancore, Indore, and Baroda. He even crafted a model constitution for the princely states of India, where he was an important player. Even in the princely states, he tried to draft constitution also. Thirdly, he despied Indian National Congress, which is incorrect, because he played a crucial role under the framework of the Indian National Congress. And he had also authored a book, Hints on the Art and Science of Government. Fine. Because third statement is incorrect here, the answer that comes out is A, that is 1, 2, and 4 only. This is about T. Madhav Rao. Then Quit India movement. Quit India movement is another important movement in the modern history. We should be able to understand this elaborately. Here we have to identify the incorrect statements here. If you look at the incorrect statements in this question related to the Quit India movement, you'll find that first is under Gandhi's general instruction. Before the Quit India movement, he gave out general instructions. In this, the statement says that the government servants were asked to resign from the government officer, which was not the case. This statement was incorrect. The Quit India resolution declared Indian commitment to defend itself against all types of fascism and imperialism, which is fine. Jati Sarkar was established under the leadership of Y.V. Chavan and Nana Patil, which is wrong. It was a parallel government during Quit India movement in the Satara. That is why in this question, when we are required to identify the incorrect statements, here incorrect statements are first and third. Answer would be B here. First and third answer would be C here, 1 and 3 only. Fine. Then next section was geography. Looked at polity, looked at ancient history, looked at modern history. Coming to geography. In geography, physical geography and phenomena in the physical geography are important for us from prelims examination perspective. Plus, geographical phenomena in the Indian physical geography, the location, how the physiography of India looks like, important rivers, their tributaries, they are part of our syllabus, and UPSC has also asked questions related to this particular section. So mapping becomes a very important part. Rivers, mountains, all these are important. So that is how the questions have been asked also in this particular section. For example, we are required to arrange these peaks or hills from north to south. If somebody has looked at the map properly of the Indian physical geography, might be able to solve some of these questions. Right? That understanding is required here. So then if you look at this particular question, in this, the Kaimur hills are part of the Vindhyas, which might be the northernmost, and Nalla Malla hills, which are part of the Eastern Ghats. If you look at the relative locations, they would be the southernmost. So 4 and 2 are, of course, your northernmost and the southernmost, which is clear. Then Garjat hills, which are in Odisha, and Mahendragiri peak is to the south of it. So the correct answer here would be C, 4132, a typical question related to mapping, which can be asked in your prelims examination. Prepare these sections elaborately. Right? Then this is one thing that has been in news related to fair and remunerative price related to sugarcane. Here, this has been continuously in news because sometimes the farmers are not able to get fair and remunerative prices. The problem is, as far as the procurement from the farmers of the sugarcane by some of the sugar mills is concerned, it has been highlighted that a fair and remunerative price has been finalized. So the mill owners have to buy the sugarcane at this fair and remunerative price. However, when they are converting the sugarcane into sugar and when they are selling it into the market, they had to sell it in an open market. So sometimes when there was oversupply of sugar, the prices of the sugar would drop considerably. And in such a scenario, they would not be able to pay back to the farmers their arrears according to the fair and remunerative prices. That is why now they have introduced a concept, the government has introduced a concept of minimum support price for the minimum selling price for the sugar and not the sugarcane. It is basically the price at which the mill owners are going to sell their sugar in the market. Even if the government is procuring or the private sector is procuring, they will have to buy it above the minimum selling price here. So if you look at this first statement, the government of India has introduced the concept of minimum selling price of sugarcane to prevent accumulation of cane arrears. It is not sugarcane, it is sugar. For sugarcane, it is the fair and remunerative price. When the mill owners are buying, it is the fair and remunerative price at which they are going to buy the sugarcane from the farmers. And when they are selling the sugar, after converting sugarcane into sugar, that is when the minimum selling price comes into play. That is just the detail that you require, an understanding of the FRP regime and the MSP which has been introduced here. Correct answer then would be B, that is 2 only. Fine. Then this is a question of your physical geography about salinity, how it varies. If you understood physical geography or in the oceanography part, you'll be able to understand this. First is temperature, salinity and temperature. Temperature decreases with increasing depth in the ocean, which is a correct statement. Normally, it's a correct statement. Salinity of the water in the surface layers of the ocean depends mainly on evaporation and precipitation. In the tropical areas, where evaporation is high, the salinity is high in the oceans. In the equatorial region, where the precipitation is high, the salinity is low. So definitely, it is impacted by the evaporation and precipitation on the surface layers. And then trade winds drive the saline waters from the western coast of the continent and pile them up near the eastern coasts. Normally, how the ocean currents, how they drive the waters in the oceans because of the trade winds, this is what happens. So all the statements given here are correct, D, 1, 2, and 3. An example of physical phenomena in the geography section, this which was asked in this paper also, which means you should have had an elaborate understanding of the physical geography questions here, right? Again, this question related to temperature inversion, which is the reversal of normal lapse rate. Normally, when you go up into the atmosphere, the temperature should decrease. But this situation is reversed. That is what is called as inversion of temperature. So look at the first statement. During the inversion of temperature, as the elevation increases, the temperature will increase. Yes. Otherwise, in normal circumstances, if you go up into the atmosphere, the temperature should decrease, which is reversed during the phenomena of inversion of temperature. Secondly, temperature inversion takes place due to air drainage in the valleys of the mountains. Cold air flows like water and deposits or collects itself into the valleys. So here, the cold temperature, the temperature decreases in the valleys, and when you go up, it increases, which is like your inversion of temperature only. Second statement is also correct. Thirdly, this phenomena is absent in polar areas. In fact, it is prevalent throughout the year in the polar areas. So correct answer here would be 1 and 2 only. Then regarding international relations, in the international relations, the questions which will be asked, which have been asked by the UPSC in the previous years, are related to your places in news. Any new place in news related to conflict zones, civil war, famine, international conventions or agreements in news, arms agreements, etc., and international groupings and meetings, international organizations, international projects like CPEC, TAPI, etc., or some important terms that you see sometimes in the news. For example, in the last year's paper, there was a question related to UN General Assembly and how it provides observer status. Similarly, there is a news that is going on related to Israel, where the UNGA has sought the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice. So we should be aware of how this advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice happens. First is only the General Assembly and the Security Council may request the advisory opinion on any legal matter, which is not the case because specialized agencies and organizations, some of them, they can also seek advisory jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice. Secondly, the advisory opinions are not binding on the matter requested. Yes, the advisory opinion is provided for in the UN Charter. It is provided directly in the UN Charter itself. 2 and 3 are correct here. An understanding of advisory jurisdiction of your ICJ is required. Coming to the science and technology section, this is supposed to be a difficult section by most of you. In this section, if you look at the way in which UPSC is focusing on some of these areas, are these. If you try to analyze the previous questions, this is what will come. It will inevitably focus on some of the emerging technologies or some of the famous technologies that we are using in our daily lives. Some of the emerging technologies like blockchain, 3D, artificial intelligence, famous technologies like virtual reality, artificial reality, Internet of Things, developments in the field of genetics, space technology and developments there, plus any path-breaking scientific discovery, if it is going to change the way in which we understand science right now, is going to be asked by UPSC. For example, when gravitational waves were detected, a question was asked. CRISPR-Cas9 would change the genetic engineering itself, so which is a molecular scissor, it was asked. And of course, scientific field in which India has made achievements like Mangalyaan, GSLV, PSLV, AstroSat, all these have been asked in the past. Similarly, some of the questions that you could see in the paper were related to this only. For example, this question is related to bioorthogonal chemistry. Now, normally it would be very difficult for us to understand what exactly is this bioorthogonal chemistry. But the Nobel Prize of this year was given on this. So at least when the UPSC asks the question in the examination, it is not going to ask you about the science of such emerging technologies. Mainly, it is going to ask you about the applications. If you look at the previous question, it has asked questions related to the application of artificial intelligence, application of 3D printing, right? So it will have applications in all these fields. Just know about it, right? Look at the next question then. Vikram S, because it is one thing that has been developed by India. It increases India's stature. That is why it becomes really important for us. So if you look at this question, which has been put up here, it is developed by the New Space India Limited, a public sector undertaking of the Government of India, which is incorrect. It is not the NSIL. but it is a startup by the name Skyroot Aerospace. Regarding the other features, these features are correct. 2 and 3 are correct here. So the correct answer would be D here. Then basic understanding of the biology, NCRTs, how the hormones work in the development of the plants. That is important. If you have a basic understanding of the biology, you will find that the cytokinin are the one which promote cell division. They are not the inhibitor hormones. However, abscisic acid is the one which is an inhibitor hormone. Thirdly, when the growing plants detect light, a hormone called auxin is synthesized at the shoot and it aids cell growth, which is a correct statement. So first and second, which have been reversed here, where cytokinin is the one which promotes cell division, while the abscisic acid is the one which is an inhibitor hormone. The both statements are incorrect. Correct answer would be B in such case, because we are required to identify incorrect statements here. So here is the correct answer that we can see here. Then regarding environment, which is also one of the important and the most difficult sections, look at the focus areas of UPSC. What are the areas on which UPSC has asked questions related to this particular section? For example, if you look at this portion, national parks, biosphere reserves, wetlands, tiger reserves, they have been the most important focus area. Important species, chemical pollutants, theoretical concepts, all of them have been asked. So elaborately prepare these sections, plus you can prepare them from your prelims compass and your 12th biology NCRT, basic concepts and things like that. Okay. So if you try to look at some of the questions, we are going to quickly wrap up because the next section will be followed by the economy. So you're going to understand the economy related questions there. This is the question related to greater adjutant stock. First statement is about its common name. Second is about its distribution or habitat. It is found in Brahmaputra plains and Gangetic plains. Third is about its characteristic in the overall ecosystem. It is the one which is a scavenger and feeds on animal carcasses. That is why all the statements are correct, because it is distributed in the Brahmaputra plains and Gangetic plains and it is a scavenger. Next is glyphosate. It has been in news. It is a one question which has been asked from your current affairs. Here we are required to identify the incorrect statements. First is, it is a selective herbicide that is particularly effective against the broadleaf weeds. It is not a selective herbicide, but it's a broad spectrum herbicide which is used against weeds. Selective would be when it is used against only specific weeds. Broad-based is when it can be used against many kinds of weeds or almost all kinds of weeds. That is why the first statement here is incorrect. Second statement is that it has been approved for controlling weeds in food crops and plantation, which is incorrect because of its harmful effects. It has not been approved for food crops, but it has been approved for plantation crops. It is again incorrect. Third is, the Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers Welfare has issued notification for restricting the use of glyphosate. It is a correct statement because we are required to identify incorrect. Read the questions requirement properly. Both the first and two are incorrect. A, 1 and 2 would be the answer here. Then concepts in the ecology section. Questions will be asked from these sections. Primary producers. Regularly UPSC has focused on the different primary producers, secondary producers. You should be aware of them. If you look at the solutions, you will find a table related to primary producers and secondary producers. Just remember the names of them. UPSC has asked questions related to them regularly. Here, if you look at the options that are available, foraminifera and radiolarians, they are heterotrophs. That is, they do not produce food on their own. These are not the first ones to produce food. They feed on other organisms. While diatoms, dinoflagellates, and coccolithophorids are the ones which are the primary producers. 1, 2, and 5 are correct. That is, B is correct here. So this is how overall the paper has been distributed. Different areas on which questions have been asked by UPSC also. And we have also tried to come up with a similar pattern, because inevitably the questions that have been asked in the previous years, they are important. Plus, the way in which the questions have been asked, the focus areas on which the questions have been asked, they are important for all of us. Now, after this, Baswa sir will take the discussion of economy related questions. And after that, we are going to take up your general queries that you have related to this paper and any kind of issue that you have faced during this paper and how to go about your preparation. We are going to discuss these things after the Baswa sir's discussion.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Am I audible? Yeah. So how did you find the questions from the Indian economy? Tough, easy? What's your perception? Please let me know in the chat box. Easy? Solvable, moderate? So in general, it was moderate to easy, right? Fine. So here, what we'll do is, first and foremost, we will look at the relative weightage of Indian economy in the UPSC prelims in the last 5 to 6 years. Then based upon that, we can get to know as to how many questions can you expect from the Indian economy in the upcoming prelims examination. And then we'll discuss as to what extent we have been able to match up to UPSC standard, both in terms of weightage as well as pattern of questions from the Indian economy. So let's start with this part. So सबसे पहले, just have a look at the overall weightage of Indian economy in the last 5 to 6 year UPSC prelims. So as you can see, in the last 5 to 6 year UPSC prelims, the overall weightage of Indian economy has been around 15 to 20 questions. This has been the overall weightage. So last year, you can see we had like 18 questions from Indian economy. So when you appear for the next year prelims 2023, the minimum number of marks which you can expect is 15 and maximum number of marks questions which you can expect is 20. So that is what you must keep in mind while preparing for the Indian economy. Apart from that, we can just look at the relative weightage of different themes in the Indian economy. And as you can very well see, the theme which gets a maximum weightage is the theme of banking and finance. Consistently on an average, we are getting 5 to 6 questions from the theme of banking and finance. So while preparing for UPSC prelims from the perspective of Indian economy, you have to give more emphasis on the theme of banking and finance. Almost like 1/3 of the questions in the Indian economy would be from the theme of banking and finance. At the same time, you have to give adequate importance to other themes also, because from other themes, we can expect like 1 or 2 questions minimum. So when it comes to our pre-Pareekshan test, from the Indian economy, we had asked 15 questions in the pre-Pareekshan test. And with respect to the relative weightage of different themes, we had kept in mind the relative weightage of different themes while making the questions on the pre-Pareekshan test as well. So what we'll do is we'll start the discussion of questions one by one. So let's start with the first question. Okay. Please have a look at the question asked in prelims 2022. The question is, with reference to the Indian economy, what are the advantages of inflation indexed bonds? Now, based upon this question, which was asked in prelims 2022, you should see as to what is the pattern of questions that UPSC has been asking. So repeatedly, we have seen that UPSC has been asking questions related to different types of bonds. Like in prelims 2022, we had a question related to inflation index bonds. In the same year prelims, we had a question related to convertible bonds. And prior to this, we had a question related to masala bonds. So that is why the topic of bonds becomes quite important. And you must be seeing that repeatedly some bonds are appearing in news. Like one of the most important bond, which is in news right now, is your sovereign green bond, which the government is going to issue for the first time. Soaring gold bonds, they're also in news. And most importantly, there's another category of bond which is in news. And these bonds are called as zero coupon, zero principal bonds. And since this topic of bonds, that is zero coupon, zero principal bond was in news, and that is why we had asked the question in the pre-Pareekshan test. So here, when you look at the zero coupon, zero principal bonds, these bonds, as you can see, they are going to be issued on the social stock exchanges. So what are social stock exchanges? So basically the NGOs and civil society organizations, if they want to raise capital, then they can raise capital through social stock exchanges. So these social stock exchanges have been recently set up by the government based upon a recommendation of a committee called as Ishat Hussain Committee. These social stock exchanges, they are not going to be standalone stock exchanges like BSE or NSE, but they are going to be part of your existing stock exchanges, that is BSE and NSE. So as far as your prelims examination is concerned, this topic becomes quite important. So you should know various things, such as who all can raise capital from the social stock exchanges. How can they raise capital through social stock exchanges? That is, what kind of financial instruments can be issued on social stock exchanges? So let's quickly have a look at that part. So you can see on the social stock exchanges, we can have two categories of entities raising capital. That is non-profit organizations and for-profit organizations. When you see non-profit organizations, it includes societies, it includes trust, and a specific type of companies which are registered under the Companies Act, which are called as Section 8 companies. Unlike your normal companies, Section 8 companies are the companies which have been set up for a social cause. That is just like your NGOs. So we call these companies as Section 8 companies. So as you can see, one way by which the non-profit organizations can raise capital is zero coupon, zero principal bonds. So what exactly are these bonds? You must have heard about normal bonds, right? On the normal bonds, you get coupon interest. And once the normal bond matures, you're entitled to get the face value back, that is principal. But in case of zero coupon, zero principal bond, if you buy this bond, first and foremost, since it is zero coupon, you're not going to get any interest. And second, since it is zero principal, you are not going to get back your money as well. So here, if you want to donate money to an NGO, you can donate money to NGO directly, or you can buy a zero coupon, zero principal bond on a social stock exchange. As simple as that. So here, if you go back to the question, you can see the question. These bonds do not carry any interest and the principal amount need not be repaid, which is correct. These bonds can be issued by both not-for-profit entities as well as for-profit companies. They cannot be issued by for-profit companies. So here, this is incorrect. The right answer is 1. Let's look at the next question. Okay. Look at the question asked in Prelims 2019. The question is, which among the following is not the most likely measure the government or the RBI takes to stop the slide of Indian rupee? Now, when you look at this question, right, we have seen that repeatedly UPSC has been asking questions related to exchange rate management. For example, questions have been asked such as, what factors cause rupee depreciation? What is the effect of rupee depreciation? Or like this question, how to counter rupee depreciation? So this is why this topic of exchange rate becomes important. So based upon this, we had asked this question about the reverse currency war. Now, what is currency war? We'll understand the currency war first, and then we'll go to the concept of reverse currency war. When you look at the word currency war, it was in news somewhere around 2014-15. As part of currency war, countries, they deliberately devalue their currencies. Devalue the currencies means deliberately decrease the value of their currencies. By decreasing the value of currencies, the countries as such can boost their exports. So you all must be knowing that if the value of rupee reduces, automatically exports from India will increase, right? So similarly, countries are competing with each other to deliberately decrease the value of their currencies and boost exports. One of the best examples of such a country is China. You all must be knowing China is a country known for export-led model, right? So if China is devaluing its currency to boost exports, won't it not encourage other countries also to devalue their currency to boost exports? So this is the concept of currency war. But are we talking about currency war? No. We are talking about the word reverse currency war. तो यहां पे क्या हो रहा है reverse currency war में? See, in case of reverse currency war, what is happening is, let's go to US. You must be knowing that the rate of inflation in US is at 4-decade high, 40-year high rate of inflation. And we all know, to counter the rising inflation, the central bank of a country, which is in this case the US Fed Bank, should increase the policy rates. So this policy of US Fed Bank, where it is increasing the rates, we call this as Fed tapering. I hope you must be knowing this. So US Fed Bank has started increasing the rates, policy rates. By increasing the policy rates, it's trying to suck out the money. So dollar supply in US is reducing. As the dollar supply is reducing, can I say that the dollar value is increasing? Which is, in other words, dollar value is appreciating because of this Fed tapering. Look at India. In case of India, just because the dollar value is increasing, the rupee value is actually depreciating. Now we know that the rupee value could depreciate because of two reasons. That is when the imports increase or exports reduce. Because of this reason, the rupee value could depreciate. But in this case, the rupee value is undergoing depreciation, not because of this reason. It is undergoing depreciation because there is increase in value of dollar. So you must have heard of a statement made by finance minister. The statement made by finance minister was, there is nothing wrong in the Indian economy. The rupee is depreciating not because of us. The rupee is depreciating because of US Fed Bank policies. And we know, if rupee value depreciates, how does it adversely affect the Indian economy? Imports into India will become costly. We are a majorly importing country. If imports become costly, this will have an adverse impact on the Indian economy, right? So it's like we will get into a kind of vicious economic cycle. How do we come out of this vicious economic cycle? Counter rupee depreciation. To counter rupee depreciation, can I say that RBI has to inject dollars into the economy? By injecting dollars, what will happen to value of dollar? Dollar value will reduce and rupee value will increase. So look, what is US doing? US is trying to increase the value of dollar, whereas developing countries such as India, they are trying to reduce the value of dollar. So this itself, we call it as a concept of reverse currency war. So in case of reverse currency war, what is happening is countries are competing with each other in order to increase the value of their currencies. This aspect we call it as revaluation, which is the opposite of devaluation. So this is the concept of reverse currency war. So you can see the first statement, under the reverse currency war, the countries devalue the domestic currency. Are they devaluing or revaluing? They are revaluing. So this is obviously incorrect. The reverse currency war comes into being due to the adoption of quantitative easing or Fed tapering. I told you it's an adoption of Fed tapering. The reverse currency war may lead to decrease in the dollar value. I told you RBI will inject dollars, dollar value will decrease. So right answer in this case is 3 only. I hope this part is clear, all of you, right? Okay. Look at this question, asked in Prelims 2021. The question is about which among the following can be included in foreign direct investment into India. So FDI is one topic which is considered to be one of the most favorite topic of UPSC, because repeatedly UPSC has been asking questions related to foreign direct investment. So this year in Prelims 2021, there was a question as to which all financial instruments are part of FDI. Before that, there was a question about which among the following is not a characteristic of foreign direct investment. So that is why we had asked this question in the pre-Pareekshan test as to which of the following can be considered as FDI into India. Now, all of you probably by now you must understood the difference between FDI and FPI, right? You all must be knowing the recommendations of Arvind Mayaram committee. If a foreign company is making an investment of 10% or more in a listed Indian company, it is treated as FDI. If a foreign company is making an investment in an unlisted Indian company, irrespective of how much money it is investing, it is always treated as FDI. You must be knowing about this. Apart from that, if an Indian company is raising share capital from US through the issuance of ADR, American Depository Receipt, it is treated as FDI. Apart from that, there are two instruments. Foreign currency convertible bonds and foreign currency exchangeable bonds. If these bonds are issued by an Indian company in overseas market, like the name suggests, convertible bonds, the money raised through these bonds get converted into shares upon their maturity. So even this is considered to be a FDI. So you can see this is what it was asked before also. So here, when you look at this, it says a foreign entity buying shares and bonds. We know if it is buying bond, in this case, it is not a FDI. It is a FPI, foreign portfolio investment. Investment in ADR is correct. And look at this. Investment in India by an Indian company which is majorly owned by a foreign entity. And this is what we call it as indirect foreign direct investment. And it is also considered as FDI into India. So let's understand this to a flowchart. Concentrate on this part. You have a foreign entity. This foreign entity is making an FDI into an Indian company. And let's say this Indian company is majorly owned by the foreign entity. When I'm saying majorly owned by foreign entity, it means that the foreign entity owns more than 51% of this Indian company. Or if this Indian company is controlled by a foreign entity, when I say controlled, it means that this foreign entity has a power to appoint board of directors on this Indian company. So can I say here that even though this is an Indian company, it is majorly owned by a foreign company. The board of directors of this company are appointed by a foreign company. So if this Indian company makes another investment, this FDI, we call it as what? Indirect foreign investment, or it is also considered to be part of my foreign direct investment as well. So last time, when you see this question in Prelims 2021, that time most of the students were confused as to whether GDR, will it be part of FDI or not? So that is why on similar lines, we have focused on this. And we said that the investment, indirect investment is also considered to a FDI. So right answer in this case would be 2 and 3 only. Okay, look at the question asked in Prelims 2018. This question is about which of the following statements correctly describes the meaning of legal tender money. This question was asked in the aftermath of demonetization. So when the demonetization took place, the government declared that certain high denomination notes, especially 1,000 rupees notes, will no longer be considered as legal tender. So we can expect questions about the current developments with respect to the money, which is a static topic. So on similar lines, we have asked a question about CBDC, RBI's central bank digital currency. I hope all of you must be knowing about this CBDC, and I have discussed this topic of CBDC in much greater detail in the last year's economic survey and budget discussion. So if you had gone through that budget or economic survey discussion, you would have got the answer easily. The RBI Act 1934 has been amended to facilitate the introduction of CBDC. Yes. The reason is, right now, when you look at the RBI Act 1934, it empowers the RBI to issue only the physical banknotes. So we had to amend the RBI Act to say that when RBI is issuing note, it can issue both physical notes as well as electronic money. So that is why this first statement is correct. The CBDC would not be considered as fungible legal tender. When I say fungible, it means, can you convert CBDC into cash and vice versa? It is. So the statement says it will not be a fungible legal tender, which is actually incorrect. The introduction of CBDC is likely to decrease RBI's seigniorage. What is seigniorage? Seigniorage is simply calculated as total profits earned by the RBI minus cost of printing notes. So that is how one could calculate seigniorage. So here it says that if we introduce CBDC, it is likely to decrease the seigniorage. Now, can I say that if RBI introduces the CBDC, there will be no cost incurred by the RBI on printing notes? If RBI is not incurring any cost on printing notes, automatically the RBI's seigniorage would increase. But the statement says that it is decreasing, which is actually incorrect. Now we can very well argue that instead of printing physical notes, RBI would have to set up a IT infrastructure to start issuing CBDC. But still, in that case, RBI's seigniorage would be higher because the infrastructure would RBI will set up. It's a one-time investment, one-time money, right? So that is why even in that case also, the seigniorage is likely to increase. The CBDC is freely convertible against commercial bank money and cash. Yes, this is correct. So right answer is 1 and 4 only. I hope we are clear, right? Okay. Look at this. Which among the following are the functions of National Land Monetization Corporation? Why did we ask this question? Now you must have heard about monetization of assets by the government. Why is government undertaking the monetization? You must have heard about NIP, National Infrastructure Pipeline, through which the government is going to raise 111 lakh crores. It is going to spend 111 lakh crores over the creation of infrastructure projects. From where the government is going to get so much amount of money? It is through monetization of assets. So when I say monetization of assets, there are two ways of monetizing. Just look at this part. One is monetization of core assets. When I say core assets, it includes roads, railways, ports, airports, stadiums, telecom towers, and so on. They are the core assets. So when it comes to monetization of core assets, we are simply going to lease out these core assets to the private sector for next 20 to 25 years. From there, we're going to get money, and using that money, we are going to create new infrastructure. So this is a kind of asset recycling initiative. And this is part of NMP. I hope you must have heard about this, National Monetization Pipeline. But we did not ask a question about this. We asked a question about this part. When I say non-core assets would include only two things, land and buildings. So when it comes to monetization of non-core assets, here we are going to either sell or lease out the non-core assets. And please compare and contrast with this monetization of core assets. Here we are only going to lease. We are not selling the core assets. So for monetization of non-core assets, we have set up National Land Monetization Corporation. So from this part, we have asked a question. So you can see which among the following are the functions of NLMC. And the right answer is all of the above. All of these three things are done by National Land Monetization Corporation. Look at this question asked in Prelims 2019. The question is, which among the following is not included in the assets of commercial banks in India? So here, UPSC was trying to test as to whether the students know as to what are assets and what are liabilities of a normal bank. So on similar lines, what we have asked in the pre-pareekshan is, what are the assets of the Reserve Bank of India? So here the question was with respect to the assets and liabilities of normal commercial banks. And here the question is about assets and liabilities of RBI. So you can see here, foreign currency assets, it's an asset. Loans to central states, it's an asset. CRR deposits of the banks with the RBI. It is not the RBS money, right? It's a bank's money with the RBI. Since it's a bank's money with the RBI, RBI is liable to give it back. So it becomes a liability, not an asset. Cash in circulation, it's always a liability because on the bank notes which RBI issues us, RBI says, I promise to pay the bearer the sum of the value of notes, right? So it's always a liability. So the right answer in this case should be 1 and 3. Okay. This is another question. Banks Board Bureau. See, this question was asked in Prelims 2022. By now, most of you must be knowing the history about Banks Board Bureau. The Banks Board Bureau was set up based upon the recommendations of PJ Nayak Committee way back in the year 2016. The mandate of Banks Board Bureau was to recommend the names of heads of public sector banks. Later, in the year 2019, the mandate of Banks Board Bureau was expanded to even recommend the names of heads of public sector insurance companies as well. But recently, that is last year, the Delhi High Court asked the government to do away with the Banks Board Bureau and create a new body. So government has decided to do away with the Banks Board Bureau, and in its place, we have set up a new body, which is called as Financial Services Institution Bureau, FSIB. So we all know that FSIB is it has replaced the Banks Board Bureau, and the FSIB is also a non-statutory body like Banks Board Bureau. It is not a statutory body. It has not been set up to an act of parliament. And the mandate of Financial Services Institution Bureau is to recommend the names of heads of public sector banks, recommend the names of heads of public sector insurance companies like LIC, and also to recommend names of heads of all India financial institutions. What are all India financial institutions? You must have heard of institutions such as NABARD, NHB, SIDBI. These are all India financial institutions. So that's a mandate of Financial Services Institution Bureau. So you can see here, the FSIB has been set up to recommend names of heads of nationalized banks, public sector insurance companies, and selected financial institutions. It's correct. Unlike the Banks Board Bureau, FSIB has been set up as a statutory body. It is not a statutory body. It is a non-statutory body. FSIB functions under RBI. It does not function under RBI. It functions under the Department of Financial Services, the Ministry of Finance. So the right answer in this case is 1. Okay, look at this question. This question is, which among the following taxes imposed by the center on the petroleum products is or are distributable among the center and the states? Why did we ask a question about this? Because it was in news last year. So most of you must have heard that almost 60% of the price that you pay on purchase of petrol and diesel, that 60% is actually a tax which is collected by both center as well as states. And here last time it was in news because the state governments were saying that most of the tax which the center is collecting on petrol and diesel, it is going entirely to the center. Only a small chunk of the central taxes is shared with the state government. So it was in news last year, and that is why we had asked this particular question. So broadly, if you see, this is a breakup of the taxes which are imposed on petrol and diesel. This is as far as almost like 8 to 9 months back. We can see that central taxes kitna hai? Almost 27 rupees per liter. So whenever you are purchasing 1 liter of petrol, almost like 8 to 9 months back, you used to pay 27 rupees only as central taxes. And look at the composition of central taxes. Sabse zyada, it is coming from central road and infrastructure cess. You can see it's like 13 rupees. Is cess distributable between center and state? It is not. It goes entirely only to the central government. Then we have agriculture, infrastructure and development cess, which also goes entirely to the center. Special additional excise duty also goes entirely to the center. So you can see here, this part is going entirely to the center. This part is also going entirely to the center. This part is also going entirely to the center. So kaun sa share ho raha hai? Only this amount. So this was in news last year. So don't you think central government is earning a lot of revenue from petrol and diesel? And major part of that is going only to center and it is not distributable. So this had become a bone of contention last year. So if you go back to the question here, which among the following taxes are distributable? Basic excise duty is distributable. These 3 are not distributable. So right answer is 1 only. Okay, let's look at the next question. The next question is about, with reference to BOP, balance of payment, which are the following constitutes a current account? What is this question? I hope all of you know about BOP, balance of payment. It's an account which keeps a record of all the economic transaction between the residents and the non-residents for a period of 1 year. So whenever money comes in or goes out of India, whenever transactions take place between residents and non-residents, all the transactions get recorded in the BOP. And BOP, as you know, has 2 accounts, current account and capital account. So in previous year prelims, repeatedly questions have been asked with respect to components of BOP, that is components of current account or capital account. So based upon this, we had asked this question about India's net international investment position, NIIP. So what is this NIIP? Here you must understand that when we talk about BOP, it's an annual flow. When I say annual flow, means how much money has come in or gone out of India for a period of 1 year. And it might so happen that whenever money goes out or comes into the India, we have built a stock of external financial assets or external financial liabilities. So the stock itself, we call it as NIIP, net international investment position. For example, you can see here, we as Indians, right? We make investment in other countries. We might invest in other countries through FDI. It will be called as outflow of FDI, outward FDI. We might invest in other countries through FPI, or we might maintain deposits in the banks based in other countries. So all of this for us will become our external assets. So what is my cumulative external assets? When you look at BOP, I just take into account flow for 1 saal. How much money has gone out and how much money has come in. But when I'm taking into account NIIP, total stock of my external assets. Similarly, when foreign residents are making investment into India, it is a inflow of FDI, it is an inflow of FPI, or it is a NRI deposits into India. Now, even though it's a kind of investment into the Indian economy, we call it as external liabilities. So if you want to just understand NIIP, it is my total stock of external financial assets and liabilities. So you can see how will you calculate NIIP? Assets owned by residents in other countries minus assets owned by non-residents within India. So here, what we are trying to do is how much assets we as Indians own in other countries minus how much assets the foreign residents own in India becomes my NIIP. If we own more assets in other countries as compared to the assets owned by foreign residents in India, it means India is actually a net creditor country, positive NIIP. Negative NIIP means India is a net debtor country. And we all know that India is a net debtor country because NIIP for India is actually negative. So if you go back to the question that we had asked, the question was very simple. The question was, which among the following can worsen India's NIIP? Worsen. Now think of it. If I say worsen, what should happen? My total external assets, it should reduce. And my total external liabilities should increase. Then I can say that my NIIP has worsened. So look at this. Increase in external commercial borrowing. We are borrowing more. If we're borrowing more, my liabilities would have increased, right? So this is correct. Increase FDI outflows from India. If we are making more amount of investment through FDI in other countries, it means my external assets are increasing, right? So actually to worsen NIIP, my total assets should reduce. So this is incorrect. NRI deposits into India. What are NRI deposits into India? It's my liability. And it says decrease in my liabilities. So obviously this is incorrect. So right answer is 1 only. Clear? Look at this question asked in Prelims 2020. It says weightage of food in CPI is higher than that in WPI. The WPI does not capture changes in prices of services, which CPI does. So this question is basically testing as to whether the students know the difference between WPI and CPI, wholesale price index and consumer price index. But question is, why was it asked in Prelims 2020? This was asked in Prelims 2020 because there was a greater divergence between WPI and CPI. So even though both WPI and CPI are used to measure inflation, it might so happen that WPI is very low and CPI is very high. And this is because both WPI and CPI give weightage to different commodities, and that weightage is not same. So on similar lines, what we have asked a question is, we have asked a question about CPI rural and CPI urban. So we know that National Statistical Office, NSO, it publishes an index called as CPI, which is targeted by RBI and which is required to remain at 4%, right? So this CPI has two variants, CPI rural and CPI urban. So this is what we had asked. So if you see here, the weightage of food and beverages is highest in both CPI rural and CPI urban, which is actually correct. If you look at the second statement, unlike CPI urban, CPI rural gives zero weightage to inflation housing. This is correct. So when we are measuring CPI rural, we are not taking into account inflation and housing. Any idea why? Why are we not taking into account inflation and housing? क्या reason हो सकता है? Anyone? Yes, because most of the people in rural India, they own their own houses. Rather than renting out houses, they own houses. And that is why we don't take into account inflation housing in the rural India. Good. So the right answer is both 1 and 2. Okay, now coming to last question, and also a very interesting question about inflation. Look at the question asked in Prelims 2020. With reference to Indian economy, demand pull inflation can be caused or increased by which among the following? So here UPSC had asked a question as to which factors lead to increase in inflation. Especially it had asked specifically about demand pull inflation. So on similar lines, in pre-Pareekshan test, we have asked a question as to which among the following will necessarily be the impacts of inflation on the Indian economy. The keyword which is important here is the word necessarily. If you don't catch this word necessarily, you'll go wrong. So let's solve this particular question by keeping in mind the word necessarily. Look at the first option here, increased fiscal deficit. So let's understand that when there is an increase in rate of inflation, what could happen to fiscal deficit? I hope all of you know the concept of fiscal deficit. It's simply the borrowings by the government. So here I can say that because of rising inflation, the prices of most of the goods and services has increased. As the prices of goods and services has increased, can I say some of the essential goods might become unaffordable to the poor people? The best example being essential goods such as food, LPG, they might become unaffordable. So government should come to the rescue of the people, right? So to provide relief to the people from the rising inflation, think what will happen to the subsidies given by the government? Subsidies given by the government will increase. Agar subsidies बढ़ रहा है, what do you think will happen to government's expenditure? Government's expenditure will increase. So if government is giving higher subsidies, automatically government's expenditure will increase. If expenditure increases, obviously fiscal deficit will increase, right? But the word which is important is necessarily. Will fiscal deficit necessarily increase? May not be the case. Why is that? Let's look at the alternative scenario where fiscal deficit or the need for the government to borrow money could reduce. Now we have a concept in the Indian economy. The concept is called as fiscal drag, or I can also call it as the concept of bracket creep. I hope you're able to recall this concept of fiscal drag or bracket creep. क्या होता है इसमें? What happens in this case is, if there is inflation, to counter the impact of inflation, to counter the increase in prices of goods and services, can I say the wages of the people would have to increase? Income level of the people would have to be increased, right? So wages will increase because of rising inflation. As the wages increase, can I say the overall income earned by the people will increase? As the income increases, people will move from low tax brackets to high tax bracket. For example, earlier, a particular person could belong to the bracket of 2.5 to 5 lakh, and let's say he is required to pay only 5% income tax. But because his income has increased, why? Because of rising inflation, he could move into the next bracket of 5 to 10 lakhs, for example, and he might be required to pay 10% income tax. Now think in this case, if people are moving from low tax bracket to high tax bracket, what do you think will happen to tax revenue of the government? Tax revenue or tax collection by the government will obviously increase. If tax collection increases, can I say fiscal deficit of the government will reduce? The need for the government to borrow money will reduce. So that is why it is not necessary that the fiscal deficit will always increase. So you can go for the elimination method. I can eliminate this option. I can eliminate this option. So I'm left with option B and option D. So I don't even have to worry about 2, 3, 4, 5. I just have to look at the sixth option. Sixth option is increase in real interest rate. Now we know that real rate of interest is nominal rate of interest minus inflation rate. Nominal rate of interest is simply the rate of interest that you get on your deposits, or it is the rate at which you borrow loans from bank. So if inflation increases, can I say the real rate of interest will reduce? So this option is obviously incorrect. So we are left with only 2, 3, 4, and 5. So this is where I'm ending my discussion of questions asked from Indian economy in the pre-Pareekshan test. So in case if you have any doubts, you can start asking your doubts. Both Mangal sir and I will take your doubts. Thanks for your patience anyways. Yeah, Rohan, you had any question? Vehicle currency. So vehicle currency is a very is a concept that has been in news recently, especially with respect to internationalization of rupee. So you must be knowing that government of India is trying to make rupee international so that it is freely accepted for doing trade. So when I say vehicle currency is a currency which is used for trade settlement between the two countries. And it is not necessarily the currency of either the importing country or the exporting country. For example, if India and Sri Lanka are involved in bilateral trade, the currency which is used for settlement of trade is obviously not the Indian currency or the Sri Lankan currency. It's a US dollar. So US dollar in this case becomes a vehicle currency. So we have big four currencies. Big four currencies such as dollar, euro, pound, yen. These four currencies are called as vehicle currencies because they're used for settlement of trade between the two countries. That's the concept of vehicle currency. Clear on? Yeah. So you can start asking your doubts.
Start end of March.
QIP, prelims QIP will start in the last week of March.
Someone has asked how to go about the medieval history. See, you refer to the standard sources, your old NCRT, Satish Chandra, plus the new NCRTs also have given good enough details about the medieval history, from which even questions have been asked in the prelims examination. If you look at the questions that were asked this year, they have also been asked in the pre-Pareekshan test. They have also been asked from the new NCRTs. So follow these sources. Beyond that, focus upon the areas on which UPSC is focusing. For example, UPSC is asking related to important terms in the medieval history. So for that, you can always refer to the compass, prelims compass related to history. Okay. Yeah, you'll get compass before around starting of the March with new updates, whatever is available, right? Whatever updates are required in the compass, it will be updated to you. Open Zoom link was not provided because it was already available on the YouTube, right? So it was not required in any case. It was available on the. Just a second. Yes, Anirudh.
Sir, I had a particular question. For example, there was a question that to protect and improve the environment and to safeguard the forest and wildlife is provided under which of the following?
Yes.
So the language of that question, I realized that it was the directive principle of state policies.
Yes.
But sir, in the fundamental duties also, it is largely similar. Protect and improve the environment,
See, it
including
is
forests.
sometimes in polity, the language of the articles also becomes important, especially when it comes to your fundamental duties and fundamental rights as well as your DPSP. So, right. So just the idea of checking was your awareness about the details related to DPSP and fundamental duties. UPSC is inevitably asking questions from these two sections. They are very, very important. Just have a focus on the language that is being used. Sometimes the duties also look similar to your DPSPs. The nature of the duty, sometimes it would feel that it is a principle that has been incorporated in the DPSP, which the government has to follow, but it is not so, right? Just look at the language that is used. That is why the inverted commas have been used for the statement. Okay. Fine. So I hope the discussion was fruitful to everybody. And if you have any queries further, you can post them on the ELEARN platform also. They will be handled. All the things related to your reports, international bodies, like someone is asking, they will be included in your Prelims Compass magazine. All the Prelims Compass magazine have been designed in such a manner that they will focus on your static portions, also update the current affairs, specifically with a special focus on the UPSC, the way in which UPSC has asked questions from these different sections. For example, if UPSC has been focusing on a particular section in a particular subject, that will be taken care of in the Prelims Compass, right? Because the previous question analysis, the themes of focus for UPSC, they're always important. Be ready, be well prepared about them. Fine. Plus also the options that have been given in the previous question, they also become important. For example, the questions that have been asked in the previous years, sometimes they are asked in a different format. That's understanding of the previous question becomes important to solve the questions in some of the prelims examination. Take care of that, right? Science and technology, your basic of NCERT and focus on the current affairs. In the current affairs, the flowchart that I had highlighted related in the PPT, the important focus areas in the UPSC examination, focus on those areas specifically. If you really find science and technology to be difficult, that would happen. Basic sources for environment apart from compass is your biology NCERT and plus your compass, plus even in the compass magazine, whatever you are studying, try to process it in the different sections that we talked about in the environment, right? Like the national parks and biodiversity, specifically the species that are in news, different aspects of those species, and look at the previous questions on the areas on which UPSC has asked questions in these areas. That will be helpful, I guess. Okay. So I hope you will be able to access the results very soon on the ELEARN platform once it is restored. I think by tomorrow morning, you'll be able to access that. You already have the solutions and you have listened so patiently and the turnout was great. Do join our Telegram channel for more updates related to anything any new initiative that we are undertaking, plus all the free initiatives, your DNS, DPP, plus your pre-pareekshan test, you'll get the updates on the Telegram channel. Do join that. Okay. So with this, let's conclude this session. Thank you so much. I hope your experience was good. Prepare well for the next 3 months based on the strategy that we have discussed for the coming months. Revise elaborately through the QIP classes. Improve your understanding of the nature of the examination. Get a knack of the prelims examination in the next 4 months. And I hope you all are able to clear the prelims examination. Have a good strategy. Thank you so much. And